Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Artcasters number 271. And got a new guest tonight. We'll get in a minute. But first, we're going to do like we always do. We're going to work our way around and tell everyone anything that we have that we're working on or that we want to promote. You're on my channel, so hopefully you know who I am, unless you came over here through Gene, if he sent something out there and you're new. But you can find my stuff at circworks.com. Where is that? Right here. Just, yeah, you can go right to circworks.com. I've got some digital products that are going to help you with coloring your comics. You can also go to my YouTube channel, and I have a series called Making Comics 101 that will take you pretty much every step of the comic making process, step by step, everything from coming up with your ideas all the way to printing and publishing and every step in between, including coloring. I got a little bit on coloring, but we've got an expert with us today that we're going to get to in a minute who can probably shed a little more light on that. But yeah, just go to circworks.com. And my co-host Josh, what are you working on and what do you got to promote?
Okay, so right now you'll see as we're doing this, I'm working on a comic pitch that's top secret that I can't really share too much about. But in the meantime, for a comic I can share, my autobiographical graphic novel 2 Stories was released from Maricosia, and it's 122 handwritten pages, hand-lettered and inked pages, graphic memoir that grapples with questions of faith, mental illness, depravity, and ultimately redemption in a fallen world. So that's available on Amazon. So and all pretty much comic retailers, but Amazon's where I'm trying to point people because it helps up the sales ranking and the numbers. So go check this out. And that being said, yeah,
all right.
That's it.
Okay. All right. And like I said, we have Gene Jimenez, and he is a new friend of mine that I met recently because we went through, or actually, I've kind of mentioned the leadership training that I went through. His wife actually ran the first part of that, the first weekend, and it's just funny how things work out because there's you gotta talk to my husband, and so we got and connected. He does comics too, and I hear that a lot, but then I never really knew the magnitude. It's funny because that comes around a lot. I know somebody who does comics too, and then when I got to meet Gene and I got to see what he was doing, and that he was kind of at the forefront of the digital comics coloring revolution. So yeah, I got to get to meet this guy. So I did talk with him briefly, but I tried to stick away from the topic we're going to talk about tonight because this is something I want to be fresh and I want to kind of dive into. So Gene, brief, kind of a elevator pitch, kind of who you are and where they can find you, what you want to promote before we kind of get into the topic.
Well, thanks, man. Well, first of all, I appreciate both of you guys. Thanks for having me on. I've watched several of your shows, and it's fun and it's always intriguing and interesting to see who you have on. So it's a pleasure and honor to be here. I have been a professional. I've been a comic book colorist since day one of digital coloring, back in 94 is actually when we started. And for those of you old enough to remember, about 1990 is when Photoshop B came out. And Photoshop B was actually in black and white. And I was actually handed an original Aldus, wasn't Adobe yet, but an Aldus Photoshop package while I was in college. And I was the only artist in the computer center. So they said, hey, maybe you can do something with this. And the first thing I thought of when I started playing around with this program was comic books, because I loved them then and I still love them today. And awesome. From there, I've got to be a professional colorist and in the early days. And then I kind of drifted away from that, and I've worked in everything from fashion to action sports television. I've taught university level for 10 years, and I've been a professional artist probably for the past 20 years, both fine art, digital art, and whatnot. And then about 10 years ago, somebody called me up out of the blue, this guy in Texas who has become a dear friend, and asked me to color a random thing in comics, and I wonder if I still did it. And so I just had him send it to me, and it turned out I loved it. the way it came out. It was a special edition Aliens Vampirella cover for the New York Comic Con. And I've been doing it ever since, working with independents and whatnot. So my
awesome.
My coloring website is icolorcomics.com. I've started producing my own independent comics as well. I have several in production, and one that came out last year is called Downtown. This is my own original story, and I've been having a ball. And I appreciate the meeting this whole new crop, as well as getting to know, reconnecting with old professionals in the past 10 years has really been awesome. So I'm just happy to be here with you guys. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's cool because I feel I feel I got to step up my game because I've got two pioneers here. We got Gene, who is one of the pioneers of computer coloring, and my co-host Josh was like one of the he was I mean, I think did you have wasn't it like the first art podcast really, or illustration podcast?
Yeah, I think probably the second.
Okay, well.
I know there was I think you were the second, but still right early on.
Anyway, and again, you can find Gene's fine art stuff at artofgene.com. You can find his color and comic stuff as icolorcomics.com, and his publishing arm is at machinecomics.com. And those links, these ones on screen aren't clickable, but we also have those in the description of the video where you can click on and everything. So, all right, Gene. So let's dive into it. So you gave us a little preview of getting that first copy of the black and white Photoshop when all this. I remember before Illustrator, I think it was Aldous Freehand that I used when I was, that was again early on when I was in college. And I don't know if we're about the same age. I think we are, aren't we?
I don't know. Maybe.
Okay. I'm 50, so.
I'm 50, so yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
You're
So we're
right.
probably in college about the same time where, it was just, most of it was still analog, everything we were learning, but there was like a computer lab and we played around a little bit with it, but yeah. So I'm really curious how that all came together. So were you working separately from the other people that were kind of on the ground floor, and then you just kind of connected? Because it sounds like you kind of were figuring that stuff out for yourself at first.
Yeah. So like I said, back in 90, it was about 90. Yeah. 90, end of 90, 91. I got handed this thing called Photoshop, and I just started kind of poking around. Didn't really think much of it at first. Mainly because, it was way ahead of its time. Back in those days, you had these really small Macintosh computers that, that's when you were still putting the disk in back and forth, to make the things go. And so you would, you would literally, grab something and try to move it, and then you can go to lunch and then come back, and it would still have about, 10 minutes to go. Before this thing moved, 15 pixels to the left or right, or whatever you tried to do. So it was lethargic, but there was also some great features that I saw, and I was just clear that this thing could do something. By the time I graduated in 93, they had already come out with Photoshop 1, and Photoshop maybe going on Photoshop 2, but they had introduced color, and then it was on. And it was like, okay, now let's see what we get. Now back then, remember, there's no layers, there's no pen to write with. Everything's there's the mouse. In fact, I remember, and we'll get to this later, but I actually drew up a design where you had a screen that you can actually draw on, and I took it to a patent guy. I said, hey, I think artists are really going to need this, and he just looked at me like I was speaking, Cantonese, and going, yeah, no one's going to ever do this. So, but I still have those drawings actually somewhere laying around here of a screen that you can draw on as I'm talking to you on my Wacom, Cintiq tab, 24-inch tab.
How was it? Just kind of a sketch, or was there technology behind it too? I mean, did you go that far, or was it just?
I had the sketch done. I had the, it was actually a stand-up desk, which I realize now. No one had a stand-up desk. No one even thought of a stand-up desk back then. So there was actually two things in one. It was an actually stand-up desk that you could tilt the the desk up and down and draw on it because the whole desk part was a screen.
Oh, wow.
So, but you know, he was like, yeah, no one will ever do it. So yeah, move along, kid. So yeah, that was fun. But so then I get out of college and I'm looking for a job, and I find a job at this little graphic design place. And after hours, I get to play on this big giant computer they have. And so I bring my Photoshop over, I load it up, and I start playing around with it. And within a year, I realized, or actually about within 9 months, I'm like, I really got to do comics, because I was coloring samples of this new book that was coming out called Spawn, and a couple of the other ones that were Image hadn't even published their first books yet, but they, for the first that year, it was like, oh my God, something big's coming, right?
Yeah.
So I really wanted to be a part of it, and so my brother and I actually went to this is how crazy we were. We went to an auction and we bought 2 Quadra 800s. And those of you that are old enough to remember the Quadras, we bought 2 Quadra 800. No, we actually bought one. And then from the end of my desk, from the end of my bed in this apartment I was sharing with my other brother, we started this graphic design company. And what we wanted to do was color comic books. And we found this little company that took us in, and I started coloring there. And then we actually became their publishers because all they wanted to do was write and draw. And so then we became the publishing arm of them. And we actually were fortunate enough to hook up with guys. There's an early book called Arachnus. There's another book, which is actually now in the Smithsonian.
Oh,
it was called...
somebody from...
What's that?
Are you guys still there?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, at least I froze for a second. I don't know if you guys did too, but I think we're good now.
I think we're good on this end.
Okay, sorry.
I'm good.
Right.
Okay.
Keep going, James.
So okay, you hooked up with.
Yeah, we did a book called Tribal Force, and that book was
okay. I remember that book.
Yeah, that was the first all Native American published book, and I'm 64% Native American, and it's actually housed in the Smithsonian Institute right now as the first all Native American book published written by Native Americans.
So to put this in context, like around this time, I'm like 14 years old and buying everything from Image because I was like, it was like this transition from like Marvel had gotten kind of stale, and all the cool guys that I was into from like Marvel were moving to this thing Image. And it was just like the coolest thing. But I remember Tribal Force, it had like a circular metallic cover.
No,
right?
I think you're thinking of Tribe.
Oh,
no. Tribe, I think.
Oh, okay. Maybe not.
I think that's what you're thinking.
I think I might be getting it confused. But I do remember Tribal Force, though. I do remember that.
Yeah. It was great. And I'm still really great friends with, John Proudstar, who was the creator and writer of it. And
so badass.
Yeah, it was really cool. But before that came about, the year before that came about, I actually wrote a hand letter. I think it was a hand letter. Yeah, to a guy named Steve Olaf, who was up in Point Arena, California, and he was recruiting colorists. And we were just still getting our feet underneath us, trying to get clients for this new little, trying to pay our bills and stuff, as well as working late trying to develop comic book coloring. But Steve Olaf had been, he colored the first digital coloring comic, Akira #8. And that had just come out a year and a half before, maybe 2 years before, 92. So we're about late 94 now. He wrote back and said, hey, we should do something at the upcoming Comic-Con. And so 95, I believe it was the first digital comic coloring symposium.
Nice.
People that were part of that were Steve Olaf, who actually ran the whole thing, and there were like 4 or 5 sessions. Brian Haberlin was part of that first group. Kiko Taganashi, who was one of the most amazing colorists I've ever seen. And I think Tyson Wendell was another person that was part of that group. And me, who had just been coloring at that point, probably a year and a half or so.
Wow.
But I got to work on some early, cool stuff with some independent guys, as well as towards the end of that studio, as we drifted into like 96, got to work on, some Savage Dragon. And then we start becoming the hired gun. It's like, hey, we need this done in 24 hours, can you do it? And we would do it, because at that time, we're 24 years old, and yeah, I could stay up all night for 4 days straight. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So, and it was really cool. It was really cool. We had a great crew. A guy named Aaron Ricks, who's down in San Diego, who's one of the most amazing artists I've ever, and still a great friend, was in there. Steve Furco was part of our friend crew. That's actually how I met Aaron. Another guy named Brian Jamerson and Bill McAvoy, who is a great indie comic book artist early in the day. And then we had some peripheral friends, a guy who I still work with, who is actually the penciler and inker on my Downtown book, Scott Sirac, who did Archangels back in the day.
Nice.
And then there's other people like Joe Weems. His house was like right down the road, so we would go hang out at Joe Weems' house. And then Robin Spihar, who became an incredible letterist, and or letterer. And now he's doing really cool stuff in 3D realms and whatnot. We got to kind of get the inside scoop, because at this time Steve Furco had just started on with Wildstorm, and so we got to work a little bit with him on that, and get to kind of know a lot of the people that, a lot of the big names that we know today. We knew Alex Sinclair in his early days, and we knew a little bit of Brett Booth and a little bit of a couple of the other, Wildstorm guys. Never really got to meet Jim though, but actually I met Rob Liefeld for the first time actually this year, but all of our friends are the same guys. Like, so that went on until about 96 actually. Yeah, 96. And then, we became known as the studio that can produce comics really good. And some guy called us from LA and said, hey, I want to put these characters on these pants and jeans and doing embroideries and stuff. And so we said, okay, we can do that. And he became our really good client to the point where he just bought us out. And that was Jenko Jeans, the big wide leg jeans. Yeah, and I became their creative director, and at that point, I was actually exhausted, because I was the primary colorist, and you're running your own studio, and you just get wiped out. And I just got married, and would actually like to have been home a little bit. That would have been good. So I said, okay, great. I went and worked in downtown LA. Got to work with some of the most amazing graffiti writers. In fact, at one time, I think we had 80% of the CBS graffiti crew working in our studio, and it was one of the coolest things. That's
badass.
Yeah, it was really cool. In fact, he said, hey, the first day I got there, he goes, hey, we need 12 million, somewhere around he goes, we need $12 million a year to make this place go. He goes, but you have creative carte blanche. And all I heard was creative carte blanche. So I didn't know this until actually probably the week I left, which was back in 99. It was about 3 years. The first year we did 36 million. The second year we did 80 million. And the year after that we did 192 million. And that was just us putting cartoons and stuff like that and drawing comic characters that were then translated to t-shirts and jeans and stuff like that. So nice. That was cool.
Yeah, I definitely remember the Jenko jeans, and I remember how much that artwork and illustration played into that. I mean, that's pretty cool. And even like I was looking at the artwork that we used for the thumbnail from your comic. I mean, that kind of, to me, that kind of harkens back to that kind of style a little bit. It reminds me a little bit of that style.
Yeah, one of the cool things is, as an independent, when we were coloring comics, we got to become really good friends with a guy named Trent Kanuga. And so we colored Aaron and I colored a bunch of his covers. In fact, if you look at his Omicron or the collected Creed, I think it's back on the shelf.
Yeah, I'm familiar with him from YouTube. I think he's got a pretty.
Oh, he's got an amazing YouTube channel and everything. And he's got a lot of stuff going on. He's bringing back his Creed thing on Kickstarter right now, so it's pretty cool.
Creed was great, man. Yeah. That was a good comic.
And I didn't make that connection that he was the one that did that, because I know the YouTube channel, but I didn't make the connection. But I remember that.
So he had Creed, and he was real successful, and he wanted to come out to LA. So I hired him at Jenko, and he was an artist at Jenko for at least a year and a half, or I think a year. Another guy I hired after their studio kind of hit the skids was Dan Frega. He came and worked for us at Jenko, and Scott Sirak eventually came to work, and I had all these comic book illustrators and really great graffiti writers. So it was like a really awesome lightning in a bottle situation for us. And then in early '99, I got a letter slipped to me. They used to walk us around with guards because they would cross the streets. There's two buildings, and they would have guards cross the street because you'd have people waiting in their cars, and they would hand you letters, offers, because you were the hottest thing in town. We were doing that more than Wrangler.
The guards were
and all them put together. And Calvin, all those guys put together weren't even doing what we were doing in like one quarter.
Yeah,
like we were doing some crazy numbers. So we were trying to be recruited, and somehow somebody slipped me a letter, and I went to New York, and I became Puff Daddy's webmaster.
Oh, really?
And that was fun. So we'd actually patented while I was at Jenko. We actually have a patent for a comic book that was a hang tag on a pair of jeans.
Oh, wow.
And so we did this little small run, and comic books that we did them like about that big. They were like this big, but they were a hang tag, and it was really cool. And they're really collectible. And if anyone goes out and finds a Flamehead comic book, they were really, really cool.
I'm sure I remember seeing those. Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone, they were calling it like the first week they came out, they're like, hey, they're all gone. Everyone stole all the comic books. And like, this is exactly why. Because at this time, I'm like 26 years old or something like that. And I'm like, let's see how much we can get kids involved in just screwing with everything, And so anyway, I head to New York, and I become Puff Daddy's webmaster, working with Bad Boy Online and this place called Hook.com. First day I get there, I sign my paper. Two guys grab me and they run me across the street because we're in the Wall Street district right now. And they sit me down, and I'm sitting across from this guy, and his name's Eminem. And they said, this guy needs a website. You need to design him also an animated online series. So we designed SlimShadyWorld.com. And we won Website of the Year for 2000.
Nice.
And it was just an animated. We started getting into animated Flash and all that stuff. So we did animated videos for Janet Jackson and Snoop Dogg and a couple other artists that they were all producing. This guy named Shine. We had a full-on video orient, like it was next level thing that Puff, and then the week before it's all post a release and everything, he goes and gets in a shootout in a club with him and Jennifer Lopez and Puff Daddy. And I'm not sure if you remember that, but that kind of canned that whole project, but it was one of the most amazing projects. And then 9/11 hit, and that changed everything. Yeah. And that's when I left. All the .coms crashed after that. Most people don't realize 9/11 actually popped the .com bubble. So then I went and did some charity work. I worked with Nelly and InSync, and just on doing fashion T-shirts and stuff like that for various projects. And then one of my buddies from college said, hey, we need a creative director for the online website side of this action sports company called Fuel TV. And I said, sure, that sounds fun. And so I was working with some of the most amazing, innovative, creative people in action sports. And that's when Fuel TV wasn't. Right now, you go on Fuel TV, it's all MMA fighting. Back then, it was skateboard, BMX, surfing, all that cool stuff that you don't see anymore. And we had discovering groups like Kings of Leon and things like that. So it was really cool. And I did that for about 4 years, and then I got a call from an old professor in college, and went and taught there for 10 years. And then that's when, during that, I actually got the call from the guy in Texas and said, hey, do you still color comics? And it turned out I still love to do it. I'd played with it a little bit. I have a lot of napkins. I have a history of napkins that were just, wiped out but I was always doodling and stuff like that because I've always wanted to get back to it. And but I was, Scott talks about these, these life trainings. I actually was in the first life training group that was in after 9/11. And so that was a really big transition for me in my life of really kind of taking everything to the level I wanted to. So from there, I became an artist and a fine artist, opened up my own studio, And that all kind of fast forwarded my life a lot. So I thought I would be, hey, I could get to be a fine artist when I'm in my 50s. Well, I just turned 30 and I had my own studio. I was teaching at the college level, starting to color comics again. And so it really kind of turned things into a direction I thought I'd be living later in life. But it turns out I got to live the past 20 years of doing what I love. So it's been
That's awesome.
I had no idea we were going to talk about comics, and then you go into all this other stuff, and it's super interesting. And so I'm trying to
now we can get to comics.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where I want to double back.
Well, so I had a question just about the early on process. So it's like, like I think about a decade later was when I first learned to digitally color, right? And a buddy of mine who worked in-house at Bongo like taught me how to do it. And like that was like the era where you use like channels, and then like you do your selection, and you'd have like your F keys like to do expand, so it like traps under the color and stuff. But I'm like, how the hell did you do that initially? Like invent the like so what was the I'm curious how the process evolved, because you were talking about like the first version of Photoshop just being kind of like a flat, like you didn't have layers.
Right.
And so like how did it evolve with like each iteration of Photoshop? Like I'm just kind of curious about like the technical stuff, because it just sounds so cool to like see that evolution, and then also to just develop work habits around it. It just sounds super intense.
Yeah, because any coloring I did, sorry, Gene, I was just gonna say any coloring I ever did, and I was obviously in it a little after that, but I was going online. I remember printing out the instructions. This is back when you're online, and you would print things out. So I had this booklet that I would look at while I'm trying to figure out how to computer color comics and everything. But even then, I mean, there were some layers. It was probably pretty limited, but I can't imagine coloring without layers, because you flat everything underneath the line art, So yeah, so go ahead, because I'm curious about this too.
I think it was one of those things that kind of came over backwards, and this is where a guy like Steve Olaf kind of really figured it out, and I don't think he really understood that he figured it out till much later in the history of it all. But so if you go back to Akira number 8, there's something really beautiful about that, because all the tones are just that, they're tones. So I don't know if you've ever seen an old color chart. I don't have one on me right now. But the old color charts, they would be these squares, right? And there would be, just these color dots and everything. But you would have to look up, okay, this is 30% cyan, this is, 20% yellow, and this is, 14% magenta. And you would hit that, and that would be like this teal color, right? And so then you would type those numbers into the color picker, and you would know you're going to get that color when it printed. And sometimes if you didn't have there was no such thing as a calibrated monitor in those days.
Yeah.
So you had to really rely on what type of, your knowledge of color combinations from a printed standpoint. And it was really difficult trying to take that technology, because that's really how comic books were colored. Back in the day, they only had, 16 colors.
Yeah, they used to use the Doc Martin dyes just to show what it was going to look like.
Yeah, it was just a combination of 4 colors. The 4 colors that the newspaper was printed. Same press that printed a newspaper would print a comic book, so they only had 16 colors to work with, and they would change the angles of the screens. And they had 4 screens times 4 different degrees, 16 colors. So take that, 16 times 16, or whatever it comes out to, is 256 colors was the original colors that we had to work with. And that was like that for at least, I don't know, Photoshop 3 or something. But we would look at our color chart and type in the color, and then fill whatever the selection or whatever, we could. But most of the stuff early on was done with shading. I mean, not shading, just making things darker, or filling that white area in with those registered, whatever the combination of CMYK was. And mostly it was CMY, because again, a lot of the stuff got printed on the same presses that newspapers were printed on. So those dots printing on a press were a lot bigger, so it became a little more saturated. So if you take out the black and just the black layer, and I don't know, probably speaking a little overhead, but in the
this is
you know, you have, there's 4 colors CMYK.
yeah, that's so.
And then you can, all of a sudden you have really bright colors, and then when they get printed, they kind of saturate down into, because that press hits really hard on a, and that's just from knowing traditional printing and traditional process.
Dude, that is such good advice. So I've taught at the college level too, and I used to teach like digital coloring at LCAD and stuff. And that's one of the first lessons, because like even though that might have been an older iteration of Photoshop, it's still a good thing if you're working to print in CMYK. Like a lot of painters learn this about color, where it's like if you mix like too much black into like a color palette, unless you're dealing with like red. It's gonna like muddy the saturation of the color, and similarly, like too much white to like lighten it, it muddies the saturation of the color. And so it's like the like making CMYK mixes that don't use black is still like great advice if you're working for print,
and one of the things I tell people a lot: go to a print house before you especially comic book people, go see what a press actually does, what it physically does, and it changes your mindset about how you're engaging with the material, because digital is great. And we got a lot of incredible digital printers, and a lot, and really advanced stuff that you can really dial it in. However, there's still a mechanic of an ink droplet going onto a piece of paper. And if you're not conscious of that, then you're flying blind. Yeah,
that's brilliant. That's so cool. Sorry, I'm a nerd for CMYK. Like I even like to keep I like to keep a differentiation of 5 like on my CMYK levels, just as like this little tick. But and that's partially because when I send stuff to offset, it's like if it's less than 5, often the difference in color like doesn't show, and so it's like that the little 5 jump. But I'm stoked about that, and I feel like that's a cool thing about coloring in digitally for CMYK. It's like that's cool. So you were able to punch those in today. It's funny, I think, because people have like so many palettes and so much freedom. It's like I feel like some of that core information, like that CMYK, I know it's nerdy, but it's like that little CMYK tip is huge. It
is, and I see a lot of good colorists today that are getting by on with using grid technology. However, their stuff is good, and the difference between good and great and the next level even beyond that is really understanding the back end and working their way backwards through the mechanics of it, and knowing that if your prints are coming out this way and you've already calibrated everything, and the digital screen, the screen you're looking at is a backlit monitor, whereas the print that you're looking at is actually a solid piece of opaque paper with ink dots on it. So you have to understand there's going to be a difference in regardless. Sometimes people get it right on, but it's very rare. So you've got to understand how it gets from that glowing screen that you've been looking at for 6 months working on this thing to something that's a hard piece of print in your hands. And really understanding what the process is. And when I think I take it for granted that I know so much about it, but when I talk about it and everything, I remember going to print houses or going to places where you had these 3-story high printers that had these rolls of paper just going through. I'm like, wow, what are they printing? It's like, oh, that's National Geographic over there. Things are going like 80 miles an hour running through this thing, and you get to the end of this giant warehouse and you're looking down, and then there's these beautiful photographs coming out, and you have a guy taking off and looking at the photographs, this beautiful print of whatever it is in National Geographic's looking at, and he's looking at it through a loop, and he's just touching one dial and going, I got to ease off here. I got to ease off. And then 10 minutes later, he'll look at it again. And he goes, okay, that's right. And I'm like, well, what changed there? Because now, all I saw you do is press one button and do this and whatnot. What changed was, him understanding choking back the yellow or choking back the magenta or, and if you can't tell that to your printer, you're going to have to live with whatever you get, and understand because that's all from a printer's point of view. They're in a mechanical situation. Now it's more digital these days, but it's still, there's still that physical, engaging if you're going to get a printed book.
Oh yeah. Yeah, especially if it's going to be offset, and not just, like digital web press or whatever,
Right. That's
really cool. Holy crap. I'm sorry. I just get really excited about the CMYK stuff. I'm an art director too. So it's like, I have to deal with printed matter all the time. And it's just like, like everything you're saying is so dead on, because it's like, another good rule of thumb with printers is like, if you don't learn that, like, and most guys who work in print houses are good people with a real like love and knowledge for the print process. They're kind of like comic artists in a weird way. It's
totally.
like if you're working in print, you're probably doing it out of love as well, like not necessarily for like mass amounts of money. And but the guys, but you need to be able to speak their language to get the results you need. Like, and a good rule of thumb, like in any form of production, is like, if it can go wrong, it's going to go wrong. Like, you need to make art to a level where it can't go wrong in theory.
Right. Totally. I think one of the best stories I have. So soon after we came up with the idea, hey, let's put comics on jeans. I got sent out to Quebecor, where all the books were printing, all the Marvel books. I mean, Image and everybody was at Quebecor, right?
Nice.
And they were printing everybody. So I said, hey, let's print at Quebecor, and made an offhand thing. And my boss said, all right, you're flying out next week. I'm like, great. So I get to Montreal and I get to the Quebecor offices and I get this full tour, and I'm walking around and seeing all I think they were actually printing. I want to say they were printing a Savage Dragon when I was there or something. I'm not sure what book it was, but they had all the cool books, right? And they had stacks of them that were just flats. And I went into the printer, he was like the assistant print manager office. And it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. His office was actually wallpapered with flat comic books.
Oh, sweet.
Hadn't been folded up and printed yet. And then on top of that, he had framed ones of those exact pieces. And I asked him, I said, wow, what are these ones? What are these? He goes, that's when we get it right. We take a lot of pride in getting it right and making sure that it's exactly the way, people want it. And whatnot. He goes, that's why we do this. He goes, otherwise, who wants to sit here and suck ink smells, and alcohol inks all day, but he goes, yeah, he goes, I guess deep down, we're just a bunch of artists that really love making it right. So get to know your printers. If that's a big advice I have for people. It's like, get to know who your printer is and who's the guy sitting there that has to monitor your job. Those guys are gold for you.
Yeah, dude. Man, it's so funny. I think the first printed comic I made was through Le Bon Fon, which was Quebecor. Like, I think when I started, I think I did a first printing through Quebecor, and then they changed to Le Bon Fon.
Le Bon, yeah.
And it's but that was a cool print house. Like, they took a lot of I don't know if I could ever afford, like, it's interesting, but now it's like for self-published stuff, like, or indie stuff. It's like, I don't know if I could do a run through them again because of the cost, but that is still really beautiful books. That's so cool. Yeah. That's great advice, man. So like, okay, so CMYK was like part of the trick.
Right.
What else, like what kind of tools did you use to, like, how did you guys, like Scott was asking, kind of with the blacks, like when you had your inks, how did you sort of separate? Like, did you, like, initially when you started, were you able to work in layers, or was it like literally just alias shapes like right next to each other?
It was alias shapes right next to each other. So what we would do, somehow we would I'm trying to remember the process because it was so like once you got to the, once like, all of a sudden there was these, the, what you call it, the extra layer, not the layers, but the extra, I can't remember what they are right now. But you had your ink layer, right? And there was no looking through that because remember, it was just everything was solid.
Yeah.
So you basically had your ink layer, and you had another ink layer in the shadows somewhere else. So you duplicate your file, you color one and color that all up, and then you'd figure out, okay, I can place this on top of it by just selecting all the ink. Because you can't do a multiply, on top of it. You can't do a darken or whatnot. It's just like, you basically select, okay, everything selected that has a black pixel, you're coming with me, and we're going to paste you right on top of this thing. And that was it. And that was like the first, I think it was Photoshop 1 through, I think 4 or 5. I think we didn't get channels until about 6, I think it was. And then I think 9, we finally got layers. But even then, layers weren't even, a factor until about 12 or 10, I'm sorry, 10 and 11.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was challenging. And even then when we got channels, it was like you had to put your ink, you copied your ink into one of your channels and turned that off, and you colored the whole thing. And that way you just didn't have to have 2 files, Then you could just load it back up, fill it all with black. And then at the end, you put in your stars and glows and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think I remember that because I was thinking that when I was first practicing that I was using layers, but I was using channels. I think.
Yeah.
Channels.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. The way I first
awesome
learned,
you can turn on a channel and see it, but not work it. And all of a sudden you're working with the RGB. And you're like, this is so great. And you don't even have to affect your ink layer. And, we're high-fiving each other. It was great.
Yeah, and work and all this with the mouse. And now I remember too, because it seems like I've been using the stylus for so long. I don't remember ever drawing with the mouse. But yeah, because I dove into like try to figure all that stuff. Because there was a time, this is back in the 90s where I just try to figure out every aspect of how to make comics. And eventually, so I was diving into all I taught myself how to ink, and then I was like, oh, okay, now I got to figure out how to color. And so I was reading up on all the stuff how to color, and I did a few things, and like even my illustrations, because I never colored any comic books professionally, but most of my artwork that I was doing was kind of in that style. So yeah, it just brings back so many memories and some of the things. I just forgot about that whole process of on doing that.
Well, I think the big thing is understanding color theory first and foremost. And I'll be the first to tell you, I colored probably my first 2 or 3 books without understanding color theory, because I didn't, in my brain, I think I had 1 class on color theory in college, maybe. I don't know. I don't even remember it. But so then I get to Photoshop and I'm like, okay, just get the values of CMYK right. So then I'm doing that, and then Steve Furco comes into my life, and it changed the way I thought about color. Nice. It went from coloring something cool to actually creating a world through color and creating an environment and creating cool and warms and hot and colds and bringing the world of the characters alive through color and understanding that what you bring is the breath, and that's one thing that we always talk about as colorists, is like we're the we just like to make up that we're the breath. We have the book breathe. And until that, it's like, okay, it's really awesome black and white work, but then when color comes in, you can feel the heat, you can feel the blast, you can feel the air, you can feel and that's what color does.
Yeah,
dude, that's so true. I've often thought like, I love like Mike Mignola's work, right? But it's like Mignola without Dave Stewart is not Mignola. It's Dave Stewart is like half of why I love Mignola's work, because he picked the right method for coloring Mignola, and they kind of work so beautifully together, where it's like if you had a different colorist doing doing Mignola's stuff, I don't think it might not work. It might not sing in that same way. And it's like, it is interesting to think of like how a colorist, you're right, like just can kind of like either, you know, complement and make it sing or just completely destroy like beautiful line work, you know? Because I've seen the other too, you know, where that's amazing. So cool.
I think that's a great example. You know, Mike Mignola, you can look at his work in color and you're immediately transported. And Stuart probably only laid down maybe 2 colors in that thing, you know, but it's done at such a beautiful way. And it's I think the best thing about that combination there is they're like Legos. They fit together really good. They're not stepping on each other's toes, and they're not, you know, overshadowing one or the other. And sometimes, you know, as a colorist, you want to really get in there and do something, and you got to really know how to pull yourself back and go, okay, how can I contribute and not overshadow or you know, kind of take over the thing? And that's been a challenge. I see a lot of colorists go through, and I myself had to learn that it wasn't about, you know, making the biggest splash as the colorist, but it was really about contributing to the story.
Yeah.
If you're not contributing it, then you're taking away from it, and then we have a problem. Then it becomes like, okay, this is not what it's supposed to be.
So I'm curious, when you had mentioned when you were first starting, everything was still on newsprint, and then there was that transition to, you know, I mean, I guess there was some stuff like with the Baxter paper. I know like some of the Marvel Epic books and stuff, they had a little better paper, but it was a totally different. They had to adjust for that when coloring and everything. So how did, I mean, this is again getting a little nerdy, but I mean, when Image first started publishing, they you know, they had that quality paper. They weren't printing on newsprint anymore. So there was a big shift there. And, you know, and what was that like? I mean, just because I remember, you know, and not being in the industry, but just being a fan when like the Image books came out, and I'm like, this is like nothing we've ever seen before. You know, even, you know, Marvel and DC weren't doing stuff like this with the paper they were using and, you know, the techniques and everything. And then of course, everything else they kind of followed, but
yeah, I think one of the big aspects of it, and this is where Quebecor really came in, is because they're in Canada and they had access to better pricing on bulk paper, you know, so they could actually produce that paper, you know, at the same price that, you know, or even just a competitive pricing, you know. So, but also, you know, look at a comic book from '92 and then look at a comic book from 1990. In 2 years, it went from $1.10, you know, $1.25 to $2.50 to, you know, now it's, you know, $4.95 or whatever. So, so you have that. But I think the other thing is you had, like I said, guys like Steve Olaf, who really understood the print process, and I'm not sure if it was the production that was going into it, because remember, he was working on Akira, and that paper was just a different paper altogether, but it was done beautiful. You know, those the early Akira books, you know, 1 through 20 something, are just beautifully done. They're like artwork, and in order to do that, you have to have a precision and really understand the technical side of things to go, okay, I'm going to put this swath of color. It's going to go from this tone to this tone, and have a gradient go across it. You got to really understand what that paper is going to be doing, you know, so you got to have that paper, you know. I remember when we started getting paper samples from printers, and we were just this little, you know, couple guys in what would be considered a hole in the wall studio. But when we got the paper samples, like, we looked at each other and we're like, I think we've made it. Like, I think we've arrived, you know, and because that at that time, if you understood paper, you know, or if you were considered, you know, smart enough to understand paper, they're going to send you a paper sample. And when you start getting paper samples of what your book can be printed on, it changes your mentality of, okay, this is where the end game is. This is where it's all going. We got to design from here. So from a technical standpoint, it really forced us to pay attention. It really forced us to, you know, be conscious to the amount of color and all the color that we were working with. And
So
I think, like I said, I think there's a lot of awesome technology, you know, especially with, you know, drawing pads and you know, the various. You can go online anywhere right now, and it feels like you can download somebody's palette, you know, color palette, you know, and it's awesome and great. But we had to build those things. You know,
yeah.
build those things, and we, you know, we had to build them each time we had a new book. We started from scratch and kept building them, and so and I'm proud that, you know, the guys I work with today are considered, you know, my brother and I, who's still actually working in the fashion garment district. So what happened is they bought our company, they hired me, and they said you can hire anyone you want. So I hired all my guys, and then I hired like 20 other guys, and it was great. And, you know, remember, I heard carte blanche. I didn't hear, you know, we had to make a bunch of money.
Yeah.
So I hired what I knew, which was a bunch of comic color guys, and technically they became really good. But, you know, like I said, the Joe Weems of the world and the Steve Furcos of the world. Oh my God, what happened?
Oh, we lost your picture. We can still hear you, Gene. But
hold on, let's see.
Yeah. So
hold on, it's smoking.
It's smoking.
Let me change my camera here, I guess.
Okay, that's a fair shot.
Yeah, weird.
I've never heard of it smoking
Put on
before.
the backup camera. Hey, how about that?
All right.
Oh, what happened there? Well, let's
wow, you got a backup camera. I don't have that.
You got a backup camera.
It's pretty badass.
There we go.
Wow.
There we go. Hey, there we go. All right. I gotta whip myself over here. Wait. Oh, opposite. There we go.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, you know, like I said, dude, all the people that we got to work with through all that are still doing well. They're really good technical artists today. They're, you know, have gone on to, you know, do some incredible work in the industry, a lot of gaming industry, a lot of the fantasy stuff, a lot of people that work for Blizzard and things like that. We got to be with them early on. So I'm really proud of, you know, our family tree that came out of Guerrilla Graphics. So it was really cool.
That is so rad. I just think it's cool that you guys were experimental enough too to kind of take on like a new technology and evolve with it, because that, like, a lot of artists will often get stuck in like a rut, you know, with like guys we all probably knew, like the guys who like mastered Corel back in the day, and then it switched from Corel, or they were masters of what was it before InDesign?
Oh, Quark.
Quark. So they'd have like Quark. Yeah, they'd have that down, and then like it switches to InDesign, and like they didn't adapt, and so it's like, I think it's cool. It's just cool. It, like, to me, what you're describing sounds like a story of that, where it's like it's kind of I mean, definitely, like, you guys had this new opportunity. It was this thing that wasn't quite figured out, and you just got your hands dirty and figured it out. And I think it's pretty rad. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Here's something I tell, so I got to teach for, 10 years, and I still have my students call me, and I still have their parents call me asking about, they have a younger brother or sister or whatnot, and what I think about college and education and all that stuff. And I think about why we were successful at what we did and whatnot. And I'm going to put it on two things. And one of those things definitely, as you get older, evolves. But the first thing is we didn't know any better. And that worked for us. That we made it, I didn't realize at the time, we just kept going. We just were like, we had so much energy. We were young in our 20s, and we're just like, all right, let's do this, and you had this good momentum of these guys that were Cavaliers that were forming this new company called Image, and we wanted to be a part of that revolution. And then we started seeing that the independent scene had some really awesome things, like with there was, like, this is when like Near X and Helena was one of our big, books that we did. And then you had things like Creed and all these other things coming out. And we're like, yeah, let's, because there was never a no. It was like, well, we don't know what we're doing. We were getting clients like, we don't know what to do, so you guys do it. And we're like, no problem, we got it, we got you covered. And then we go back in the studio, we're like, okay, how do we do this? We would say yes and then figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
And so that worked for us. As we got, and the other thing is, like I said, we didn't know any better, so we didn't have a lot of no's around us. As we got older, as life happens, as life lifes you, and whatnot, you start developing your crowd and the people that you hang out with. And sometimes it's you. Sometimes that no becomes more often than the yes or the hey, let's try it. Yeah. And this is where you've got to, especially as artists, and especially comic artists, it's one of like the things. It's like the buzzkill, in the industry of, no, that's not the way it's done, or there's this person that's always like, you probably have this small crew, and I know I'm talking to a lot of young guys out there because you see them at all the Comic Cons. They all hang around together. You have their little crew of guy, and this is my inker, and this is my guy, and this, or we're just, I'm an artist, he's an artist, and we're buds, and we hang out. You got to watch for the person in the group that's always a no, definition that is always the negative, and that is always, that always has this, and they don't mean it, and most of the times they don't know they're doing it, but it's just the environment or what they've been taught about life. And this is where you've got to come in and go, okay, if I'm going to be forward and be a creator in my life, I need to be around people that are not only a yes, but are a hell yeah, not a no but a yes and person. It's like, oh, hey, let's try this. All right, let's go for it. Versus, hey, let's try this. My buddy, or I heard of a guy one time that did that, and it's not going to work. And this other guy did it, and I heard like there's so much. It's like, whatever is coming out of that person's mouth, you've got to find a way to be around that, because that will kill your career. That will kill your love of comics. That will kill your love of whatever you're producing. You've got to surround yourself with people that are up for the adventure, that are up for the discovering, that are in possibility. And I know I'm guilty of it myself. I find myself, sometimes I'll just be going and I'm like, that's, so I'm starting to teach myself to draw right now, to draw my own book that I've been wanting to do for 30 years or whatever. Whole nother story. But I notice that I have that chatter in my head. That I have that chatter of, not possible. You're too old. Look at all these awesome people that are out there right now. You think you're really going to compare up to them, and you're going to really do this thing. And there's some little voice deep down that goes, fuck yeah, let's go for it. And I always find that guy in there somewhere, even though everything around me is saying, no, 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 no. So you've got to also understand that people around you sometimes live with that voice coming out of their mouth. And you've got to really say, I'm here for what I'm here for, and let that drive you. And sometimes it's hard. It's hard. Sometimes they're people in your family. Sometimes they're your best friends you've known for years. You've got to allow yourself to move forward because it comes from within you, not because someone told you not to.
Yeah, dude, so good. I mean, I really love the book, the War of Art, which is gets into this whole idea of resistance and the fact that, and it can apply to things other than just art, but in general, the idea being when you decide to do something positive for your life, usually things that are more long-term in reward require a lot of investment and time and work. And they're usually really rewarding after,
again, or at least I did.
Oh, did I freeze or?
No.
Oh, I think Scott. I think Scott's frozen. Well, anyhow,
you're back.
Sorry.
so they're usually they're usually kind of rewarding as well. But when you sit down to do these things, write or create or make, usually if you're doing anything other than just consuming, you're going to face resistance, and you're going to see that in forms of your own personal resistance. That's the stuff in your head of well, I'm too old, or it's too late, or in the case of I personally experienced the one that's pretty common for art directors or people who work in-house where it's like I get home and I'm like, I'm tired, I need to watch TV, that kind of thing. And so you're going to get those things, and you either overcome them and gain ground in this like war we're all fighting, or you succumb to them and then you lose ground, and losing ground in a war is not a good thing. But along with that, like what you were describing, that's to be expected. It's like, if anyone out there who's watching this is like being a creative, and you're noticing that when you sit down to do something creative that's going to further your career, or you say yes to something, like you're going to get faced with like naysaying, and you're definitely going to get faced with every form of resistance from even the people that are closest to you, where they're like, well, you got to come do this. Oh, you got to come do this. Oh, suddenly like everything will come out of the woodwork to kind of prevent it. And I totally, the only reason I'm rambling about that is like, I think the only reason I was even able to build like an illustration career for myself was like shutting that down really quick and just being like, no, like, you know, especially when you're young, your early 20s or whatever, you got friends that are like, come on, have beer, let's go party. And you're like, you know what I'm going to do instead? I'm going to have coffee, and I'm going to just, you know, like send out like 10 query letters, and like, you know, because I don't know any, like, I think what you just described is so true, because it's like, you don't know any better. You don't know like that it's not okay to like send cold emails to like the editor of Rolling Stone. But what's weird is you do that, and then every once in a while you get a bite, and you're like, oh, like that's how it kind of works. But if you listen to like that voice or that resistance, like wherever it's coming from, it's like, it's going to be really hard to persevere. But it's like, I don't think it ever goes away. Like personally, I haven't ever really had it go away, you know?
Yeah.
But
a great instance was in the first year, at the end of, actually in our last year, so we were fielding all kinds of, you know, job offers from here and there. And we got this call from this guy, and literally the call was, hey, yeah, I heard you guys do comics, and why don't you come out to the office and we can talk. Now, if I got that call today, I'd be like, yeah, probably not going to happen, bro. You know, back then though, it's like, hey, let's go up to the office and talk, you know? So me and my brother go driving up, we walk in, and there's this guy sitting right here, and he's like, yeah, you know, we want you to do this comic book, and over here is sitting Gene Simmons, and we got to work on his comic book. And then we got to do their product, you know, we got to do graphic design for their product catalog that sent them on their $6 million revival tour for Pepsi. But had we not known better, you know, we would have just passed on that, and they would have got to be hanging out with somebody else. But, you know, so that we got to spend, you know, the full afternoon with Gene Simmons and with Peter Criss on the phone, and it was awesome.
They didn't say who they were. They just like,
no, we didn't. We had no idea. It was just like this blind call, you know, and literally that, I think what I said was probably more than double what the guy told me. He's like, yeah, can you come out to the office? We know you do comic books, and we just want to hire you for something. And we're like, Sunset Strip? All right, let's go check it out. You know, like we didn't know better. But that's what led to that, you know, and when you don't know better, it actually, you know, the curiosity is beautiful, you know. Yeah. And we had some other ones that were just like, hey, yeah, we want you guys to do this, and it turned into complete disasters. But through those failures, we got to learn some really cool and meet a lot of amazing people, you know. So at that time, that whole fail forward thing was not even, you know, that wasn't a thing, but we did a lot of it. We failed forward a lot. And when you allow, especially in art, you know, because when you say you're going to be an artist to your family, it's like, oh, really? You know, but I thank God I have, you know, my mother was just, you be an artist? Cool. I just bought this whole pen set, and she just kept throwing stuff at me, you know, and because my other brothers were, you know, sport jocks. You know, I'm the youngest of 5, so my other brothers were just like these jocks that, you know, I got to be the punching guy or the tackling dummy. And eventually, I think my mother was just like, all right, just give him crayons, and he doesn't have to get beat up. And it was great, and it worked out, you know. So, but I know families out there that say, well, you know, don't you think a lawyer would be way better, or don't you, you know, some type of real estate career would be really great, and you could do art on the side, and you can do it at home and everything, and whatnot. And when you allow those voices and all that stuff to kind of be the narrator for your life, it's not your life anymore. You know, your life being narrated by somebody else's narration, and that's
I think one of the things for me that keeps me going is, and I always say that, you know, there was never a plan B. There was never a backup plan. You know, if this doesn't work, I mean, I never really had any other kind of job. I don't know how to do anything else with this. So I got to make this thing work. So, you know, and you got ups and downs and everything, but yeah, I mean, just the fact that I can continue to do that, and now, you know, these recent weeks and everything, going through this transformational leadership, it's just like, I just feel like these doors are just going to open. I just can't wait till the next chapter of my life. Well, I'm actually in it now, but yeah.
I'm not a big believer in like what's that book, The Secret, right? Like that kind of thing. But because there's a lot of truth to it, but there's also like, you know, a reality of like, you know, no matter what somebody is like fantasizing about or visualizing, if they're like sinking in mud or something, like literal mud, they're not necessarily going to be able to just, you know, have a vision and magically get out of there, right? But I will say, like, if you don't have vision or drive or like purpose or like a clear vision of like where you want to go, it can totally create its own failure, and not a failing forward like you were just describing. Whereas like, I think the attitude of like, of kind of like of exploration and vision, where it's like, okay, this is where we're going to go. Like, you know, I think like when I think back to my career, which was nowhere near as cool as either of yours, I think. But when I think back to when I got in, the portfolio I was sending out, I had no business submitting that. Like I was pretty good for the school I went to and stuff, but I had no business submitting it to the places I submitted it. And yet some people took a chance and hired me, and it's crazy. Looking back, because the work was terrible. I had a terrible sense of anatomy. I didn't know, like, there's a lot of things I learned along the way, but it's like, I think that you have to be able to have that vision of like, okay, I'm going to go to this place, or like you know, we're describing, it's like, I'm going to figure out how to digitally color comics. It's like, based on what example? Based on no example. I'm going to do it because I'm going to get a computer and make it happen. And I think there's something to be said for that, like kind of intentional vision. I don't know if that's like what sorts of things you guys go over in leadership, but I will tell you, like, you know, in working as an art director, it's like when you're running a team of artists, and you totally know this because you ran a much bigger crew than the little team I run, but it's like, there's nothing that'll kill a team more than negativity and like a lack of vision. And that goes both ways, like from me or from my team. It's like, either way, if I'm too negative, I'll notice my whole team just goes, like, productivity drops, like people get bummed out, right? If I don't communicate vision enough, like people, you know, start. But if you keep communicating vision, the best people to have on a team are like you were describing, the people who are like, yes, let's do it. Let's figure it out. You know, that's the best you can have, you know?
Yeah. And here's the thing, here's the trick. And this is where, like, you know, cause I get a lot of conversations about, you know, The Secret is great. You know, they just talk about, think about it and do it. And it's like, yeah, you know, I'm actually as well annoyed because vision, or, you know, a dream or whatever is just hot air without action.
Agreed.
Like, if you have the best vision in the world, but if you're not in action about it, it's not really much. You know, it's not, you know, you're not really accomplishing much. You got to follow every intention and every vision. You know, the work, a lot of people you'll hear, especially, you know, in the new age or transformational, they'll call it the work. You know, the work works if you work the work, you know, but you can't sit there and go, you know, I'm going to sit here on this mountain and intend to have a really great life. And it's like, you're just going to be on a mountain for a while. unless you actually go out and live that life, and and be willing to get dirty and be willing to put the work in this to create whatever you're going to. You said that was a great idea, that you inspired people to follow you with, that you convince people to fund, that that you didn't compete for people to fund, and you need to go raise funds. If you're not out there in action about it, and you're not out there swinging away and either succeeding crazily or failing miserably, but yet getting up and going after it again, all of that intention and dreaming and good ideas are just hot air that is just
agreed
occupying so much of. We have a lot of great ideas in the world, but we have very few people that are actually willing to get out there and get their hands dirty and make that stuff come true. And those people are the ones that everyone is trying to be like.
That's so true. Oh my gosh, I love that too. And also, if you don't have that kind of attitude, it's really hard. It's going to be a hard career because the thing is especially comics, right? It's you're going to submit, you're going to get rejected, you're going to submit, you're going to get rejected. And then every once in a while, some magic lines up and it's going to happen, but that you aren't going to be there for that to line up unless you're consistently doing output. And the another thing that's helped me come around to that kind of point of view is because I'll have similar thoughts where I'm like, oh, I'm too old for this. Or even when my book came out, right? All the book insecurity stuff came out, and I caught it. But it's initially it's oh, well, it's not that big of a publisher, which is kind of silly because it's well, it is a publisher, right? It's all the negativity came out. So it's not that big of a publisher. It's not that big of a print run. No one's going to buy it. Okay. Then when people buy it, it's not enough people, right? And then it's if it actually starts selling, it's well, it's not going to get awards. It's not going to, all of those things come up. And it's I consciously have to choose to try to look at it's really cool that I did that. That was my intention, was to put out a book. I put out a book. Now I work on the next thing. And it's all that thought, the reason I try to catch those thoughts, and turn it to some kind of action is it doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't get anyone anywhere to be oh, okay, well, it's not that big. That thought could be used on the next project or on promoting this thing so it becomes the thing I want it to be, so I think that's really, sorry, it just touches true to my own experience of what keeps me going in a creative career. Because it's I can't also leading teams and dealing with executives and stuff like that can be politically difficult and tenuous. And so it's you really have to cling to tiny victories because often that's all you're going to get. And so it's you get a big vision and enjoy those little victories. Cause
that actually became my specialty. I think somehow I figured out how to talk in a corporate world as well as talk to artists and be with artists, So, they'd come into people would come into the studio, whether it be at my original studio or, the in fashion or even, into the television and whatnot. And so you had corporate execs coming in and they would talk to me, and then I can turn around and talk to creatives, guys that, just are head down or just don't like people in general, but they're really good artists or they can produce something really good. So that was one of the things I realized I could do, is talk both languages and talk and relate both, because I was an artist as well as I got, I learned how to, talk to in a corporate environment and give presentations and all that stuff. I think the biggest thing is, and when we really look at it, the people that really stop us the most is the guy in the mirror. And that's really what it comes down to. When that person's not in action, everything shuts down, and it takes a lot of gall and a lot of nerve sometimes. And I used to say that a lot when I was younger. It's it takes a really lot of courage to be an artist. It's actually, it just takes you being who you're meant to be, who you truly are, Yeah,
100%. I mean, yeah, and it takes investment because it's I mean, if you want to make a graphic novel, it's not going to make itself.
No.
And if you want to write a song, it's not going to write itself. Like, it's like those things, and the time isn't just going to appear. Like, it's not like one day the time's just going to drop on your lap. It's like it literally is one of those things of like the choice between, you know, I come home and I like watch football for an hour, which I don't really watch sports. I'm equally the nerdy kid in my family, although I'm in a family of nerds. But it's one of those things of like choosing whether I'm going to like invest time in TV or whether I'm going to invest time in like working on a book. And it's like, if you work on a book, guess what you end up with at the end of it? You end up with a book. But if you're like, you know, I see that a lot, especially with young artists where they're like, yeah, I'll do this when I'm out of college. And you're like, no, you're not. Like, you got to do it now in college. Like, that's the best time to do it. Like, you think you have no time now, you're never going to have more time than you have. And they're like, but I have a job. And it's like, yeah, but it's like, you still have time. You still can make it happen.
Time is interesting because, you know, we always act like it's either our time or somebody else's time.
Yeah.
So now time is actually, we have it as this thing. But I'm sure Scott would probably tell you, if you look, because I was just on his YouTube channel, I was like, holy crap, look at all this.
Yeah,
like,
I can't believe how he juggles
stuff. And on, you know, and I'm thinking about it as we speak right now. It's like, look at all that time. And then I'm like, yeah, but right here, right now, you're just right here, right now. You know, all of that it's just a blink. So when we actually start engaging with time as if it's not this scarce thing, look at everything that you produced. It's crazy. It's a crazy amount, and it's valuable stuff too. Like it's educational, and it's really informative. And you know, it's a blink because here we are, we're 50.
Yeah, and the one thing that I'm trying to do more than anything right now is just be present, you know, and be, you know, and because for me, you know, in the past I'd always be multitasking or worrying about all the other stuff that needs to get done, and then it would get in my head, and then things don't get done. And as far as things like the YouTube channel, you know, that just happens over time, and the thing that once you start working a certain way, you build systems. So you may not have that time up front because it's going to take you a while. There's that learning curve, and you're figuring out, well, what, you know, it's in the beginning, it took me, I had to teach myself how to edit it. And, you know, all that stuff. And the more you do it, the faster you get. So now, you know, I just know every week I've got to put up a new video. And then right now I'm kind of doing a weekly thing where I'm chronicling the week that I do. So I can't really skip ahead. But, you know, when I wrap up this 100 days of making comics, then it's like, okay, well, I've got these 5 ideas for a video. I can batch this stuff together, and you find ways to make the most of your time, and then that allows you to have more time to work on something else. So, and it's just getting comfortable with a certain thing and figuring out a system for it, and then that'll open up more time. And it's even like the projects that I'm doing right now, I'm trying to build, you know, a scenario where, you know, I build all this stuff up front, I put it out in the world, and then I get the royalties and stuff, and that'll give me the freedom to work on other things that I want. So yeah, it's just it takes a little while to get to it, but I mean, it's sticking to something. Because every single thing I started, I mean, there's failures. Like I've been doing all this book publishing, you know, coloring books and notebooks, you know, all this stuff. And, you know, only a percentage of them sell. But then, you know, then they'll have something that didn't sell, and all of a sudden it just starts selling, but it's out there. So, but you just got to invest that time, and then you'll start to, if you stick with it long enough, I mean, yeah, it starts to grow and everything. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's as you were speaking, I was thinking about, like I said, back to our first studio, you know, and we had just gotten to the point where we were getting calls on the weekly basis. We were getting, became known, you know, and we had a system. You know, my brother was a flatter. Back in those days, there wasn't a flatter. You know, there was no such thing as a flatter, but we figured out how to be a flatter. You know, and so that helped the entire studio. And so now we had this system going on, you know, and we just had things coming in, and people were just grabbing pages and trying to get them done as quick as possible. And once we got that system, and this, you know, I think I told you, one of biggest thing I regret was, taking a left turn and going and doing something else, because if you chronologically go out, I wouldn't be working today. We would have had a successful studio, and we would have had the history would have changed for my trajectory. Now I'm really glad about the career I've had so far, and I'm not done. But I do regret once finding that system that works for you, abandoning it, and kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because you have a different vision. All of a sudden, this new idea comes, or this new opportunity comes, and I've noticed that, in my early stuff, is like, oh, I just left that, and that was a really good thing. I probably, if I would have held on to that maybe another year and a half, I wouldn't have to work ever again right now. It would have been great. It would have been on automatic. So those are things, I think in hindsight, especially when you're young, if you can find something and develop something out that just works and becomes an automatic and is not assuming your time, and it's not, because it does take time to develop it, especially when it's never been done before, and it could have been different. It could have been a lot different, but you got to be present to it. You got to understand, say, hey, I built this thing, it works. Just walking away from it may not be the most beneficial thing, because it's producing and standing on its own, right now. So yeah, I get that. And you're probably realizing now, just like I do, like when I'm painting, time is irrelevant. People always ask, wow, I produce a lot of paintings, but I don't work a lot, and it's because I'm so present when I'm doing it. My brother will come by the studio now, and I said, man, how'd you do all these? And it's like, I was here 2 days ago and these weren't here. It's like, it comes, and that's one thing I love. Once I had my process down, I just held on to that later on and becoming a fine artist. And now I can produce really quick, and it gives me time to be in development or find out other ways to have other visions and intentions happen, and then be in action on those.
Yeah, I mean, that's perfect. Yeah, I think we might want to put a pin in it for now.
Yeah,
and then,
that's so good.
And I definitely want to. I'm sure Josh is in agreement, but we definitely want to have you back, Gene.
Yeah, for sure. It was fascinating, man. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience. And I honestly, it sounds like there's so many things we could talk to you about, because it's, I mean, a pretty broad career,
Yeah.
Like.
Well, I'm totally excited. First of all, thanks for having me. I would love and be honored to come back. I mean, there's so much really cool stuff happening in comics these days, with San Diego just getting rescheduled and all that. And I can talk about that as a what I would call an infant publisher, and navigating that now, and about to do my Kickstarter later in the year probably. And so there's a lot of cool stuff I would love to talk and just bounce off you guys as well. So
and we usually, in this case, I kind of had something in mind that I wanted to talk to you about, but we usually do let our guests have first dibs on whatever topic they want to talk about. So so any if there is definitely something that's pressing that you wanna kick around, let us know. All right, so let's kind of go around the table. We'll do sort of like we did before. Josh, I usually close it out because I've got to do all the newsletter stuff and everything. But you wanna take over then, Josh, and then?
Oh yeah, of course. So so speaking of comics and all that fun stuff, pick up my graphic novel, hand lettered, hand inked, handwritten, and handed to you in print. So it's autobiographical, and it's on Amazon.com. And I noticed that, I don't know why this happens, because I don't think the rate is from the publisher, but I've noticed on Amazon, like the price will go down and then back to kind of normal, and down and back to normal. And I did some research on it, and it turns out they just do that with books on Amazon to try to kind of game the algorithm. So it's cheaper now. Like 2 days ago, it was 19, and now it's like 15. So if you've been thinking about getting this book, might be a good time to jump on it, because if you're watching this tomorrow, I can't promise that'll be the price. Yeah, that's it. That's it for me. Oh, and thanks, Gene, for being on this, because it's been cool. So.
Yeah. So, Gene, anything that you want to let people know about before we close it out?
Well, machinecomics.com. That's where we're gonna have some announcement pretty quick on some new stuff that we've been working on. Scott Sirag is my partner in there, and we've been working on our own stuff, trying to get stuff into development. And like I said, probably be having a Kickstarter by the end of the year. And then Art of Gene is kind of my home base, and you can get a lot of information about my fine art, my photography, my comics, and then the whole machine brand of clothing that I just kicked off this past year. Because that's what you do in a pandemic. You start your own clothing line. So that's it too.
All right, and then also iColor Comics is for if you're coloring comic, if you,
yeah,
I assume I don't know if you're taking on clients for that or how that works, but
I am actually.
Okay.
I am. I'm still taking on independent comic. I'm working with Dark Emerald Entertainment right now on a couple things. The past couple of years, I've been with Emerald as well as helped relaunch the Stargate series and did a book called Hatchet and a couple other ones and a couple other independents. So I'm really excited. I love working with independent creators and publishers, and have a couple projects that I'm helping people pitch as well. So you can find me at iColor Comics. My portfolio is there. That's just like a really, really small sampling. Just give me a call. Would love to talk to you if you have a fun project that you just wanted to get off. And I love supporting new creators as well as working with guys that have been there and back. So happy to talk to you about your projects coming up. Awesome.
And all these, there will be clickable links in the description of this video you can check out. As far as me, you can find my stuff at circworks.com. I have a bunch of digital products. I got my own comic books, both digital and physical versions of those. I've got prints. I got a print that Josh did of my comic. There's limited quantities available. You can pick that up. And you can also find me at on YouTube, where you can find my series Making Comics 101, and it's just a full course of about 70 videos that takes you every step of the way through the process of creating a comic. So if you're kind of like an old hat to this, then it's a good refresher course. And if you're new to it, it's gonna definitely teach you some stuff that you need to know if you want to do this stuff professionally. So, or even as a hobby. So check that out. Again, I want to thank Gene for coming on. I want to thank everyone in the chat. And I almost forgot. So if you want to know how this thing works, we do this show every single week. It kind of bounces back and forth between my channel and Josh's channel. It's usually on a Thursday night, but sometimes we'll do it on a Wednesday if something else is going on. So it can get a little confusing, but it doesn't have to be confusing. All you have to do is join our mailing list, and we don't spam you or anything like that. Usually what we do about 30 minutes before we go live, we send out a notification via email with a link. You click on that link, and we'll tell you who the guest is and everything, because we always have a different guest. We've got rotating guests. So just join the mailing list, and you will be notified when we got a new video, because YouTube doesn't always notify people. So definitely check that out. That link is also in the description. And like I said, thank you to everyone in the chat. Thanks to Gene, and we will see everyone next week.
Awesome.
Later.